Hi, everyone. Welcome back to One More Thing. Today we have Pastor Adam, and he's going to be sharing more about his message that he did this past Sunday. Reach out. So, what do you have for us, Adam?
Well, I know wanted to talk a little bit more in depth on some of the points I talked about. One of the things is that, um, when we look at the story about the woman with blood disorder, there's a lot of isolation in her life. I talked a little bit about it on Sunday, but oftentimes that we will feel ashamed and alone and isolated due to our struggles.
Yeah.
We feel that our trauma, things we deal with, things that we struggle with, we're the only ones going through that. We're the only ones dealing with that, and it isolates us. It makes us feel alone.
Yeah.
And I think out of those times, it leads us into more struggle, more difficulty because we're alone, and we try to combat that shame and that being alone with other things. We make more poor decisions based upon that and stuff. So, I really think that this story speaks to us about, how we shouldn't let our shame and our struggles and how those kind of correlate together keep us from reaching out, from seeking what we need to help cure us and heal us.
Yeah.
And I think this story really speaks to that.
Well, if I could just, as you're saying that, I think about how back then, today it's easier to conceal things like that. Back then, I mean, it's really hard to conceal blood anyhow. We've done a better job nowadays concealing that, but just to think about somebody having to deal with that on a constant basis, probably not knowing where can I go, what can I do, how do I hide this,
Well, especially with the culture and the laws back then, you had to pull yourself away from society. Well, if no one saw Betty Lou at the water well this morning and the next morning, and then you're like, oh well, you know what I mean, and oftentimes, if you were deemed unclean, the public shouted
Absolutely.
it out. They called you out on it, and so you couldn't just walk through. So I mean, we could replace that with multiple things. What if you deal with drinking? Well, then you're walking through the streets. Oh, alcohol. Everyone points out to. So thankfully, we don't have that today. Like you said, it's easier to kind of keep that personalized, but just because we can hide it and just because we can keep it, doesn't mean we should. I think, we don't want to let that shame keep us from seeking the help and seeking the cure that we
Yeah.
need.
Yeah, I was just meaning that the fact that it was
Yeah.
even harder for her at that time.
Oh yeah, for
because
sure.
the embarrassment, because we've all, like you mentioned, been embarrassed, and sometimes we should be okay with being embarrassed.
Yeah.
That God's going to use that for some reason. But what else did you have?
In looking at the different translations of this verse, I touched on a little bit there Sunday, but the different translations said either she said this or she thought this. But either way, I think it's kind of important to note, especially in her situation where she is making this determined, actionable thing. If I just touch him, I'm going to be healed. Whether she thought it or whether she said it out loud, I think we know from other scriptures, there's power in speaking truth. There's power in that speaking. So we've got to say things in our life to really hold that. Jesus said our words matter, and we shouldn't waste time talking about the circumstances around us and what things are saying, but we should speak into. I think so. That's profound. So, however you want to take it, I think King James Version says she said it. NIV says she thought it. Whatever. I think there is power in saying that, especially in her situation where she is needing a healing. She needs all the power into that as she can. And so by saying things out loud like that, it just, and even just common motivational things for us. If we say things out loud, you always say, go to the mirror and say, you can do that. You know what I mean? Right. It adds to your motivation, adds to your strength. and I think it helps eliminate fear. So I think there's a lot of times in our life, if we're seeking any type of healing or cure or help from whatever we face, whatever we're dealing with, I think we got to say it. I think we got to speak it into existence and speak it into truth. And that really helps, helps us, So I think that's good for us to keep in mind.
Good.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, the intent to look at Jesus and it's to seek after Jesus, I think is just that decision, we all have to come to grips with,
Right.
as far as how do we see, is Jesus the one that's going to be the one that is the one that's saving us, or the one that's going to heal us from, that she had that thought of, all I need to do is just touch him, just to touch the hem of his garment. It's just pretty powerful in itself.
And kind of on that, as I was reading this again and going through it, knowing, and I even talked about how she 12 years suffered this and spent all her money going to all these different doctors. I hope people don't misunderstand that by saying, well, this is her last resort. She's finally choosing Jesus. I don't really believe that the case. I feel for those 12 years, Jesus wasn't doing ministry. You know what I mean? I think it was the last straw for her because it was the last thing, and then she was cured. You know what I mean? I think, she heard about Jesus. She heard of the miracles. She felt in her spirit that this is it. This is my cure. I need to get to him. And so she made that choice. She could have continued on seeking other cures and methods, but she chose at that moment to accept, to go after Christ. And like I said, I just hope people don't think that's wrong. And I don't want people in the world to choose Jesus as a last resort. I think as soon as you recognize him, realize him, that's what we should go to first.
Yeah.
In this woman's case, he wasn't there at that time for her first, but he was then, and that's when she needed him. She just happened to be at her wit's end. She happened to be at her last straw, so.
Well, and I think that, another aspect to look at it is the reason why she was dealing with for 12 years is because God knew the exact time that he was going to bring healing to her. And I think a lot of times 12 years seems, it is a long time. But when it comes to God and what he's able to do, that God used that moment for him to help other people to see the impact, because people knew that woman, I'm sure.
Yeah.
People knew stories like you mentioned about that woman and the fact that she was healed at that time. So to me, like you said, I don't think it was just that last resort. It was more, hey, this is the right time for her to receive that healing from Christ, because God knew that her faith would be there to trust God, to trust in Christ, So.
And that is the hardest thing for people today to accept, because they get angry that God works that way.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you got to wait for a specific time, God? Why can't you heal me now? I think you're missing the point, or people are missing the point in that. The fact is that obviously God's taking care of you. Obviously you are going to be healed. What's it matter if it's at this very moment or 2 days from now or 3 weeks from, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, God will knows you're going to be okay, knows you're going to be healed, and it's going to be wait for the opportune time where, like you said, that we ourselves are ready to accept that healing. We're prepared to come to him, full trusting and things like that. So I that does kind of get me sometimes. People just take that the wrong way. They get upset that God works that way. But
then and a lot of people aren't going to receive the healing they may want. But that doesn't mean that God can't use your weakness. That's what we find out with Paul. That's what we see in other people. But there are times that God does use some type of disorder or some type of issue like that God can really help somebody and not just help the person, but it helps those around the person, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, I think a lot of times when we come to God to pray, we're kind of selfish about it.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking about what's going to be the benefit for everyone as far as faith, we kind of concentrate on, well, I just want it for me. You know, if we're really willing to surrender our lives to Christ, then he has all of us, right?
Yeah.
And that's the hard part for us to kind of be open to. And I think she was out of that point of desperation, but at the same time, she looked to Jesus as being more than just a doctor, more than just a healer. I think she believed he was God's son. You know, I think there was more to that. So,
and kind of speaking on that, it's not really a disorder in the same sense, but I think of a shortcoming with Moses. It's not being able to speak well. Well, how did it impact? I mean, it brought in Aaron. It brought in others.
Yep.
You know, to this mission instead of just being solely. You know what I mean? So to your point, that just popped in my head when you said that. That's a good example.
That's very true. And I think the other thing I'd add to that too is that God can work through weaknesses.
Oh yeah.
A lot of times we focus on, and I'm not saying perfection is good. I mean, in the sense that we want to do it. I shouldn't say. I don't think perfection is good. I think doing a good quality work is good. But a lot of times, God doesn't always work through even the good things that we think are well done.
Yeah.
God works in the mess. God works in the weaknesses because He shines through that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the power is not coming from that individual; it's coming from God Himself. You know?
Yeah, because if we were perfect and did everything perfectly, then where would we give the credit? Where would we? You know what I mean? So I think God keeps us humble that way by working the way that He does. But the other thing I want to touch on is really nothing totally new. I just really want to reinforce this is that, you know, in this particular moment, you know, Jesus he's got another mission. He's got another goal in front of him. He's working his way through this crowd to go do another healing. And so there's that sense that he is walking away from this woman. Yet she does not let that stop her, and she doesn't let the crowd or anything stop her. She makes her way to him, even as he's walking away, to make that touch, right? And I think that I want to reinforce that because I think if we take that into our lives, and there's so many times that we probably feel that God's not around, or maybe He's literally walking away from me. We can't let that stop us. God is not intentionally walking away from you. You know what I mean? In this sense, you know, I just want to take that further in our hearts or minds that, you know, we have to have that attitude the woman had. We have to have that motivation. We have to have that determination, persistence that I even talked about, to go after and seek that. Because sometimes we do. I mean, God does come to where we are, but, you know, like we mentioned earlier, even you said, you know, He comes to where we are at the right moment when we're ready to receive Him. And if you're desperate and you need healing and you believe that He is go after Him. Don't sit around and wait for Him to come to you. I mean, He can and He will, but we need to have that persistence to pursue God that way. So I thought
that's really why it tells us to seek. You know, we're called to seek. You know,
yeah,
we're called to look.
Yeah. So,
anything else?
That's about it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today on One More Thing. And if you're interested in finding out more about the church, visit our website at lovelead.life. Thank you.